Great. So I'm going to be talking about our Citizenship for All campaign, which includes, as Jay was mentioning, the Adoptee Citizenship Act is a very central part of the work that we're doing both at KAtCH and as Adoptees for Justice. And then also our larger legalization for the 11 million campaign that falls under that as well. So, okay, this is not me, just so you know. This is just a picture I got off the internet. Yes, but as you know, this represents many of our experiences. I myself was adopted from Korea when I was 1 year old in 1973, a long time ago. At that time, my adopted parents were living in Minnesota, which then had more Korean adopted children coming to Minnesota than all the other 49 states combined. It was a huge hub for adopting Korean children. And, my parents, because they thought they couldn't have children, they tried to actually adopt a white child, but there was an 8-year waiting list, so they could not wait that long. Then they tried to adopt a Black child, but they were told they would never be able to instill a sense of racial pride in that child. So then they talked to their friends, they're like, oh, you could adopt a Korean child. And so that's how they ended up adopting me, and then later my brother, who is also adopted from Korea. And then after that, my mother got pregnant. So we also have a younger sister who's their biological child. But mostly we grew up in Virginia. My family moved to Virginia when I was 5 because of my father's work, and then later to Birmingham, Alabama, which is where I went to high school. And, at that time back then, there were very few Asian Americans in the South. So they thought actually that my brother and I were Native American and would say racist Native American things to us. Sometimes racist Asian American things to us, but mainly Native American. And so we really thought that Korea was a country that somehow had exploded and didn't exist anymore because we never saw any other people that were from Korea that looked like us. And so when I got older and I managed to leave the South and move to Chicago, a friend of mine told me about what is now the HANA Center. It used to be called KAtCH, and that they were offering classes there in Korean language and drumming and culture and history. And so I went there with my friend to take those classes and to finally start exploring what my Korean identity meant to me. And then the HANA Center is the Chicago affiliate of KAtCH, which is the organization that I work with now. But there I also found that they had, in addition to offering all those great classes and educational resources, and in addition to also being an organization that had been founded by some adoptees, I found they had a social justice lens. I'm a union organizer, and so I was very excited to find an organization in my community that was also working towards social justice. So I started to volunteer. That's just a little about me. So, when I got to Chicago, I started to meet other Korean adoptees as well, and figured out my brother and I were the only Korean adoptees in America. And so there was actually many, many of us. And so these are just some statistics. There's not a lot of really great research because the U.S. State Department didn't actually start to really track intercountry adoption until the 90s. There've been already a lot of us who came from Korea by then. So these are sort of estimates of how many intercountry adoptees there are in the United States, but you can see there are, somewhere between 354,000 to 500,000. I've seen numbers that have ranged all the way in between there. And from South Korea, somewhere between 160 to 200,000 to be adopted by parents somewhere else, with probably somewhere around 110, 150,000 in the United States. Also, and Korea really opened the door to other countries sending children for adoption as other countries around the world. That's just a little overview of that there are many of us. And then, I think many of us who are adoptees in this meeting have experienced some of the same, is one of the reasons it's so important that organizations like KAtCH exist, so that there is a community of folks that you can be part of that can relate to your experience that I think is very unique to the intercountry adoptee experience. And so, we all struggle with our sense of identity. Well, I shouldn't say all. Many of us struggle with our sense of identity and who we are because we predominantly grow up in places, where there aren't a lot of folks who look like us. We struggle with isolation, racism, of course, because we're in the United States. Some of us have difficulties with our adopted families that we're placed in. There are higher rates of suicide in our community, and people are generally, some folks also want to do birth family searches. So I think those were things like when I was first getting involved in the Korean adoptee community in my 20s, that were things that we were talking about a lot. And I believe are things that people are still talking about today. But what I didn't know about was that there were actually some of us who didn't have US citizenship. So I knew that I had gotten citizenship, that my parents had taken me and my brother to a naturalization ceremony when we were 5. Well, I was 5 and he was 3. There are pictures of it and I have my naturalization paper. But I just assumed that all of us had that experience, that all of our parents had done that, adopted parents. But then one day I remember I was sitting at my desk and someone sent me a news article, and it was about a Korean adoptee named Adam Kratzer. This was in 2015, who had just been placed in deportation proceedings because he did not have US citizenship, and he was being deported for a crime that he had committed when he was 19 years old. He was now, at that time, and he had just turned 40 when I showed up at his door and put him in deportation proceedings. So that was the first time I learned that this was an issue in our community as well. So how did this happen? So basically before 2000, there were sort of 3 main reasons that adoptees did not have citizenship, or their citizenship were not secured. The first reason was just that, our adopted parents, they just didn't know. They assumed since they were adopting us, and they were US citizens, that, just like if they had a child who was born here in the United States to them biologically, or even born to them abroad biologically, that child would automatically be a US citizen. They just thought, of course my child's a citizen. And I think that's the assumption many people, if you ask them, would think today. The second reason is that they may have known, but because they had just gone through this long and expensive adoption process, and then the citizenship process is also long and expensive and cumbersome, they may have started it but didn't finish it, or they couldn't afford it, or these are some of the things we've heard from parents of adoptees without citizenship, was another barrier to why their child never secured their US citizenship. And lastly, some of us were adopted into homes where our parents knew and they just didn't do it for us. They could have been, they're negligent, and sometimes they're abusive, like in the case of Adam, he was adopted twice by abusive parents. And so they knew he was supposed to get citizenship, but they just didn't do it for him. And so we found, as we have met adoptees without citizenship, that these are the 3 main reasons folks don't have it. Because after Adam courageously came forward publicly with what was happening to him, other adoptees without citizenship who thought they were all alone also started to come out and talk about it and find our organization so that they could try to work together to remedy the situation. So in 2000, President Clinton signed into law this legislation called the Childhood Citizenship Act, which grants automatic citizenship to intercountry adoptees who are adopted by US citizen parents. But there are sort of 2 problems with it. Number one, it didn't cover adoptees who were born before 1983. So it had a cutoff date. So if you were 18 or older by the time the bill was enacted, you would not qualify under this bill. And so it left out a lot of us who were born before 1983, like myself. And then second, it also didn't cover adoptees whose parents may have brought them on a visa that is not part of this legislation. So most of our parents brought us on visas. visas, basically, or orphan visas, qualify in terms of their age, but they don't qualify because of how they were brought into the United States. And so we call this a loophole in this law. So while it does help a lot of us, it didn't help all of us, and that's why there are still adoptees. So we have been working on this, trying to remedy the situation with a new bill called the Adoptee Citizenship Act since 2015. We're about to reintroduce the bill for the fourth time, trying to get it passed through Congress. So, we've been trying to spread awareness, educate our community members, including adoptees, our larger Korean American community, Asian American, everybody. We're trying to educate everybody that this is an issue that needs to be solved. And we've done that through folks signing postcards like this one that I'm showing here, signing a support letter, which I'm going to ask you to sign in a minute. All different ways that we can contact our members of Congress. We've been to DC many times, meeting with our legislators and their staff members. People are always, usually, if they've never heard of it, they're very shocked oftentimes to hear that this is an issue. And so also, I just wanted to highlight that, while this is something that's impacting us as an adoptees, our larger Korean American community also feels like this is an issue that impacts them as well, as we are all Korean American. So in some of our advocacy days that we funded, folks who are not adoptees from the HANA Center and the Korean Resource Center and NACSEC Virginia have come out as well to do these legislative visits with us and to support adoptees in getting citizenship, showing the unity within our community. And then another way that we have tried to raise awareness and support for this bill and try to get pressure on our members of Congress to do something about it is by, so here are some of the states and cities that have passed resolutions in support of the Adoptee Citizenship Act. KAtCH was really central here in Illinois in passing a state resolution. It's actually seen as one of the most progressive state resolutions for the Adoptee Citizenship Act in the country, and is being used as a model in other cities and states because the language is so intentional about how it should include all adoptees. So that after we passed that resolution here in Illinois, one of the members of Congress actually contacted one of the bill co-sponsors asking how they could learn more. That's one of the things that happened when we were able to pass something like that. So how can KAtCH members support? There are many ways KAtCH members can support, have been supportive and can continue to support. So as I mentioned, the bill is being reintroduced. It's actually supposed to be reintroduced next week. We're very excited about that, both into the House and into the Senate. And so it's going to be very important that we reach out to our legislators to sign on to co-sponsor the bill if they are not already co-sponsoring, and then also to ask our networks in other places, other states, to contact their legislators as well. So some things you can do is you can sign up to receive updates and calls to action, either through Adoptees for Justice, which NACSEC code. You can email your member of Congress and or call, or if you'd like to have a meeting with your member of Congress, we're happy to help you set that up. Help you prepare for the meeting and go to the meeting with you. Uh-oh. Can you still hear me? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. I was kind of frozen. Okay. And then also, as I mentioned, reach out to your network in other places. So, okay. So that is, I guess one other thing I would just mention, Adoptee Citizenship Act, is that we at NACSEC and we at Adoptees for Justice are very committed to a bill that is inclusive of every single adoptee. And so regardless of what visa people came in on, regardless of whether people have had interactions with the criminal legal system, we believe that every single adoptee should have citizenship. And so there was a time in the last session of the 2018 version of the bill, they actually tried to cut out any adoptees that had interactions with the criminal legal system. So we had to withdraw our support from the bill. You know, we were brought to this, you know, we were brought to this country to be part of American families. We lost our, you know, language and our culture. And so when we get deported back to another country where we were born, it's very difficult for us to survive. And we don't believe anyone should be deported anyway, of course, but definitely as adoptees, that should not be happening. And so we would rather wait and have legislation that includes them. That is what we're working on. Okay. All right, so then the second part of my presentation talks about our larger Citizenship for All campaign, of which the Adoptee Citizenship Act is part of. So, you know, KAtCH's mission is to organize
Hey, Becky.
Korean and Asian Americans. Yes.
Hey, can we just pause for a second? I think some of us are having trouble hearing you. Your audio is a little choppy.
Oh, really?
For me. I know you're cutting in and out a little bit.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, is this better?
A little better, yeah, right now, but I think it's intermittent. Dennis offered that maybe, well, I don't know if this is a viable option, but taking down your PowerPoint will help. That takes up broadband. I think for those of us who aren't Becky, we could also try turning off our video and just listening. And that might save a few kilobytes. So we'll give that a shot maybe if people can stop their video, and Becky, you can keep going, and we can chime in to see if it's helping.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So KAtCH, we're a national Asian American organization, and we have affiliates. There's the Hana Center in Chicago. There's one in Pennsylvania, Virginia, Southern California. We also have partners now in New York.
I think it's still cutting out, Becky.
Texas as well. And as I mentioned, you know, Korean adoptees have.
Becky?
Oh.
Becky?
Is it better?
Becky, okay, yeah, let's
Yes?
go to, yep. Let's just, we went out of share screen because it was still coming in and out. So let's try here just from your audio. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, you just have to listen to me, not be able to look at pleasant things. I'm sorry. Okay, so I was just kind of explaining that KAtCH has affiliates in several different states. So here in Illinois, the Hana Center, and then we have one in Pennsylvania, in Virginia, and in California, and then also some partners in New York and Texas now. And as I had mentioned earlier, Korean adoptees have always been a part of our organization. There were a couple Korean adoptees here in Chicago. I remember when I first started going to the Hana Center, who had been part of founding both the Hana Center and KAtCH. Although we never worked on an adoptee-centered issue, I think until we started to work on the issue of adoptees without citizenship in 2015. Also, you know, in the Hana Center's leadership, there's Tamika and Danae and Caitlin. So I'm really proud that adoptees are interwoven throughout our organization. And, you know, I think we can, as Korean adoptees, think of ourselves as very separate from the Korean American or Korean immigrant community. But I really see us as one community. So I also just wanted to talk about that a little bit. So, you know, there are roughly 2 million Korean Americans who live in the United States, according to the 2010 census. Of those, probably about 5 to 8% of the overall Korean American population is Korean adoptees. we're a significant part of the larger Korean American community. And of course, there are different generations within that community. There's the first generation, who are folks that immigrated as adults, the 1.5 generation who immigrated as more as children, second, who were born here, adoptees like ourselves, and then biracial Korean Americans as well. But I think many of us have our own immigrant experience. For the most, those of us who were born in Korea and then came here, no matter when or how we came, we all came to this country as a result of different social, political, and economic forces, and the same historical events that were happening brought us all here one way or the other to the United States. We all unfortunately experience, as Korean Americans, racism and xenophobia living in the kind of white supremacist country. Of the 2 million Korean Americans, about 160,000 are undocumented, and about 19,000 Korean American adoptees do not have citizenship, which is also a common experience. And then I really feel like in my own journey as a Korean American adoptee, whether you're an adoptee or you're first generation or 1.5, we all have our own Korean American experience, and there isn't one that is more valid than another one. We just have different ones, but all together, we are Korean American, and every one of our, the diversity within our community is also a beauty within our community. And so I think, it's just about learning about each other, finding those connections and those similarities, but also, learning about the differences and celebrating those as well, just as we did with any other group of folks we're interacting with. But there is a common, you're obviously, to me, we're one common community. So as I mentioned, there are a number of our folks who are undocumented. So of the 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, 1.7 million are Asian American. People usually think undocumented immigrants are Latinx, but there actually are a significant number of Asian Americans who are undocumented. They're Indian American, Chinese, Filipinx, Korean American, Vietnamese, Pakistani, they're, from everywhere. And so I was going to show you a video, but I don't think that will work. So I'm not going to show it, but maybe I can put the link in the chat after. But it's a short video about actually the KAtCH board chair, Ju Hong, who just talks a little bit about what his experience is as an undocumented.
Becky, if you put it in the chat, maybe somebody else can play it.
Okay. All right, let me try. So are you going to try to play it now, or is it later?
I'm gonna pull it up, Becky, just a minute here.
Okay, thank you.
I was gonna say it shouldn't be me because my internet's really bad, actually.
Are people seeing this on their screen? The video?
Yep.
Yep, okay.
Nonverbal communication. Movement is nonverbal communication, a sense of freedom, expression, a form of relief. When I'm on the dance floor, I can be myself. Came from South Korea when I was 11 years old. When I first got here, I was overwhelmed. Big cities, big buildings, My mom, my sister, and I are undocumented. I just grew up in a single-parent household. For a long time, I felt ashamed of who I was being undocumented. Dancing really helped me to express my emotions. When you're in the dance floor, you have to connect with different people. Perhaps I've been craving for that. I want to express myself. I want to talk about my immigration status. I want to talk about who really Jew is. When I got DACA in the mail, I took a photo of my work permit and I shared to social media. Hey, look, I have a work permit finally. Through my DACA, I had the opportunity to travel back to South Korea for the first time in over 13 years. They looked at me differently. I dressed up differently. I talked differently. I got to see my grandmother before she passed away. But I also learned that I knew where I belong. I have my family here. I have my best friend here. My name is Chu Hong, and I'm 29 years old. I'm an immigrant, a dancer. I am from the Bay Area, and this is my home.
And so, there are many of our community members like Ju who came to the United States for a better life, but is undocumented and so faces very many challenges. Very similar, I mean, the same challenges actually that adoptees without citizenship face as well. There's the fear of being deported and separated from your family every single day. Folks are denied access to public benefits, including healthcare and Social Security, even though they are paying millions of dollars in taxes every year. They're unable in many states to access higher education. There's only 23 states in the District of Columbia that allow undocumented students to be eligible for in-state tuition. They're unable to access driver's license. I'm sorry about my dog. There's only 16 states in the District of Columbia that allow undocumented community members to have a driver's license, and then it's not even the same as other driver's license. So Real ID gets enacted, they will not be able to use that to travel. It's very difficult to secure gainful employment, which forces undocumented folks into a shadow economy where people are exploited. And then also, as I was mentioning, that we also really believe for the Adoptee Citizenship Act that it must include every single adoptee, including those who may have had interactions with the criminal legal system. We believe the same at KAtCH, that all 11 million undocumented immigrants should have citizenship, and that there's a narrative that's been created in the United States where some people are deserving of citizenship and some people are not. So the young quote unquote dreamer who came here as a child, somehow was very exceptional, got to an Ivy League school, they're deserving of citizenship, whereas someone else, who could be a parent or, a senior or just someone who doesn't fit that narrative, that they are undeserving. But we don't believe that. We believe every single person who's in this land is deserving of citizenship. And when we talk about citizenship, we're really talking about full equality, because we also recognize that that piece of paper that gives you citizenship doesn't mean that you have necessarily access to healthcare. It doesn't protect Black people from the police. There's limitations, but for our undocumented folks, it's clear that not having their citizenship is a barrier for them. And so to us, full citizenship means full equality, means people having access to quality food, housing, education, healthcare, transportation, communication, and environment. That's what we're really talking about when we talk about citizenship for all. And that should include all our undocumented team members, including our adoptees without citizenship as well. So we invite you to be part of our campaign that is both. So whenever we're talking with legislators about citizenship for all, again, we're talking about the 11 million undocumented immigrants and adoptees without citizenship and the Adoptee Citizenship Act. And so we invite you to be part of that campaign with us. You can either visit our website at adopteesforjustice.org, or you can visit us at KAtCH.org, or you can do both and get involved that way. Or you can just let me know, and I'm really happy to connect you as well. Thank you so much for letting me talk. I really apologize for all the technical difficulties. And again, really appreciate having this opportunity.
Is there a chance for us to talk or ask questions?
Yeah, that's actually a great segue. And thank you so much, Becky, for your overview and everything there. And again, apologies for the technical glitches. So we're going to open it up to Q&A, but that also includes if you missed something that Becky said, now's the time to ask clarifying questions or just broader reactions to Becky's presentation. So again, thank you so much, Becky. And we'll open it up for questions. You can use the raise hand function. And for those that aren't familiar, you pull up the participants list, you find yourself and you raise your hand. You can also use the chat function if you prefer to type your question in there. So it looks like, Dennis, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So my wife and I are parents of two boys that we adopted. Both as infants, one is 23 and one is 18. Back in the 1980s, I worked in Washington, D.C. for United States Senator Charles Grassley, who is now the lead Republican in the Judiciary Committee. And he and I have maintained a close relationship over the decades. In 1999, I had an extended lunch with him, and I complained to him about what a burdensome and awful process it was to go through to have our oldest son become an American citizen, and that it was just a terrible, awful process. And Senator Grassley said, "Are you and Rhonda planning to adopt again?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I've got an idea." The next time I saw Senator Grassley, he said, "Are you and Rhonda still planning to adopt again?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, after our conversation, I worked with a couple of other people and we introduced, and Bill Clinton has now signed the Childhood Citizenship Act of 2000. And Senator Grassley and I have talked about the Adoptee Citizenship Act multiple times over the last year and a half. He and I have a phone conversation scheduled for this coming Tuesday morning to talk about this a little bit more. And my first question is, and I want to preface everything I just said by saying thank you to Becky and everybody else across the nation that's involved in trying to do the right thing for adoptees. A very, absolutely the right thing to do. So thank you to everybody. Becky, is the legislation that's going to be introduced next week, how is it the same, or are there some differences from it as opposed to the bill that was introduced last year that didn't proceed?
Yes, thank you for that question, and thank you for advocating for this legislation as well. That's great that you know Senator Grassley. He's an important person in helping move that legislation forward in the Senate. So yes, the bill that's going to be introduced, hopefully by the end of next week, is exactly the same as the bill that has been introduced in the last sessions of Congress. The language is all the same.
Thank you. There are a couple of specific issues of concern that I know that a couple of the members of Congress had with that bill, and I'm trying to get some information that can help prepare me for my Tuesday morning phone call to address those. The bill talks about that if an adoptee had been deported and because of criminal activity, and the bill says, well, if it was properly resolved, then they could come back to the United States. And there is a concern among some members of Congress that the words properly resolved is a little too vague. And, for example, and I'm just going to read straight from the letter email that I got from another member of the Senate. Dennis, if someone had been deported because they were convicted of assault, what would proper resolution of that look like so they could get their citizenship? So I'm looking for some of your reaction or thoughts there. I don't want to take up all the time today. You got my email address from when I signed in, but that is, if I can come up with a good answer to that, I think we can address an issue that several folks in the Senate are talking about behind the scenes that they've got as a concern here. Okay,
Yes.
and Becky?
Yes. I think that is something that we are often asked. And so, the way I talk about it is that, my parents, so, as I said in the beginning, my parents adopted me and later my brother, and then they had a biological child, my sister. And so we're all their children, right? If my citizenship hadn't been secured, if I made a mistake and committed a crime, then, I would pay the price, whatever that may be, but then I would be deported because I wasn't born here. But my sister, if she did the same exact thing, then she would not be, she doesn't get double punished, right? She just pays the price and then she's able to go on with her life. So why wouldn't I and my brother be afforded the same thing, given that we have the same parents, that we're all their children? It's not logical. Also, I think in terms of proper resolution, whatever people's thoughts are on the criminal justice system, the proper resolution is that whatever our current system says they have to do in order to repent for that crime, that's what they end up doing. So, like for Adam, for example, he was incarcerated. He spent over 2 years in jail for stealing, and so, but then after that, then they wanted to deport him. I mean, it was many years too. So that just doesn't make sense. Like, people already have paid the price. And then again, to do a double punishment, it doesn't make sense.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becky.
I think. Yeah, I'll shut up, but thank you.
Oh, Jay, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Dennis, for asking those really thorough questions. I mean, I think it's always important to connect, as Becky, you shared your kind of personal connection to that very thorough question. So it's always helpful to kind of put it into context too. But I wanted to see if others had questions or comments.
Hey, Jay.
Yes, Alan.
Yeah, so, and I know, I think there's like 20 of us on this call, and certainly a lot of us know each other, but I don't know everyone. I wouldn't want to take up unduly of the limited time we have, but to the extent there might be time for a quick whip through of who's who and the context of why you're here, I would be grateful for that if there's time.
Sure, that's a great idea. I think we could combine that, Alan, with also a group photo. Thanks, Becky. Becky just provided her contact and her email address in there if you have any follow-up questions as well. But if we take a moment now, we'd actually love to get a group photo of tonight. So if you're able to and willing and you'd like to participate, please turn on your video now and we'll take a group photo and then we'll get back to. And Chris, do you want to take the screenshot? If you're able.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll do a countdown from 3. So once everyone's ready to go, I'll go 3, 2, 1, click. All right, sound
Perfect.
good?
Wait, let me fix my hair. Hang on.
All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. I'll do one more. All right. 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you.
I think
I
we
have-
have. Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
I think,
Jay.
Oh, go ahead, Danae. And then Chris, you mentioned you had a question as well.
I was
Yeah,
just
I dropped it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a very leading question, which was because I think, Becky, your sound was cutting out a lot in the second half of the presentation when you were talking about the connection between the Adoptee Citizenship Act and the Citizenship for All campaign. And so I just wondered if maybe you wanted to re-highlight a little bit more about what's going on with the Citizenship for All campaign and ways that people can get involved in that as well.
Sure. So, you know, whether you're an adoptee without citizenship or an undocumented, what we would call an undocumented immigrant, you know, you're experiencing the same kind of barriers to being able to have a productive and healthy life in the United States. And so in KAtCH Citizenship for All campaign, we are organizing and advocating for citizenship for the 11 million undocumented immigrants and for inter-country adoptees without citizenship. The one thing is that in the legislation that we are supporting around the pathway to citizenship for the 11 million, it does not include a pathway back for people who've been deported. That's why even though adoptees without citizenship who are currently living in the US may be covered under immigration legislation, the ones who have already been deported, they would not. And so that's why it's very important that we also pass the Adoptee Citizenship Act as well. But, you know, in our campaigns the last couple of years, we've had adoptees without citizenship join together with our other undocumented folks. It's very powerful. They have a very common lived experience and need the same kind of support. And so, yeah, we're really excited that they're working together, and that we're able to combine the campaign in a more holistic way.
That's great. Thanks, Becky.
Sure. I feel like you listen to me talk a lot. Tanika, do you want to answer the ways the Korean American community can better support? Tanika is also a board member of Adoptees for Justice.
Oh, I don't, you know, I think that, thanks, Becky. Becky, you did a great job. That was awesome. So I would just say, and Becky and, you know, anyone else feel free to jump in. Alan's also, you know, part of Adoptees for Justice. You know, Nancy went to Springfield, but, you know, like there's a lot of people. Danae works at the HANA Center. But I think the main thing is just signing that a support letter and getting that support letter and the message of support to Congress people. So I'm not sure who asked the question, but if you're, if it's a, you know, situation where someone's a Korean American who's part of any other organizations, I think it's great to mobilize your network and support and just get them to sign on to the support letter. If folks can meet with their Congress people right now, since the bill is just about to be introduced, I think that's like the number one thing that we can do right now. We just really have to reach Congress. We have to kind of reach them really strongly in the next like month and just like go for it. And, you know, if folks have connections with media, you know, we're always looking for ways to place stories as well. So whether it's Korean ethnic media or like more mainstream, you know, English, you know, whatever English speaking media, I think any way to get the word out. Once the bill is introduced, it's going to be a really strong push on Congress and on like public opinion. Becky, anything else?
Yeah, I think if there are Korean American organizations that are willing to support, it's always great to have them reach out to their constituents, as Tika said, to drive calls and letters to members of Congress. We also had some Korean American community members contact the embassy, and the embassy was actually because we were needing to secure a new Republican co-sponsor of the bill. So they actually reached out, the embassy reached out to some folks and were able to help us with that. So there's some things that the Korean government can do too, actually behind the scenes. So Korean American community members can be really helpful with all those.
Great.